The great hall of the galactic conclave stretched for 3 kilometers in every direction. Its walls were made of living crystal that had grown for 10,000 years. Light from a captured star floated in the ceiling, casting golden rays across the assembled delegates. This was the heart of galactic civilization. This was where the oldest and most powerful species gathered to decide the fate of younger races. Today, they would decide the fate of humanity. Ambassador HFY of the Veloci stood at the central platform. His body was tall and thin, covered in silver scales that caught the light like mirrors. His eyes were large and black, holding the cold intelligence of a species that had ruled the stars for 50,000 years. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the hall and into the minds of every being present. "We have watched them for 200 years, HFY said. "We have studied their history. We have analyzed their behavior, and we have reached a conclusion that cannot be ignored." Around him, the representatives of 11 other species listened. The Crethon, massive beings of stone and moss who communicated through chemical signals. The Synthesis Collective, machine intelligences housed in floating spheres of black metal. The Ythmari, creatures of living light who had existed since before the first stars died. And 8 others, each ancient, each powerful, each convinced of their own wisdom. "Humanity," HFY continued, "is a threat." He waved his hand, and images appeared in the air above him. A blue and green planet spinning in the darkness of space, cities of glass and steel spreading across its surface, ships launching from its atmosphere, crude and primitive but growing more sophisticated with each passing decade. They have been spacefaring for only 200 years. In that time, they have colonized 17 worlds. They have reverse-engineered technology that took us millennia to develop. They adapt faster than any species we have ever encountered. The Crethon delegate released a cloud of purple gas that translated as concern. Their numbers grow quickly as well. Their breeding cycle is remarkably short. Yes, HFY agreed. They can double their population in less than a century. At their current rate of expansion, they will control a significant portion of the Orion Arm within 500 years. Within 2,000 years, they will rival our oldest civilizations in territory and resources. But they are so young. The Ythmari representative flickered. Perhaps they can be guided, taught, brought into the conclave as junior members. HFY's scales rippled with what might have been contempt. I have met their leaders. I have looked into their eyes. They do not wish to be guided. They wish to grow, to spread, to consume. They ask questions that should not be asked. They reach for knowledge that should not be touched. He brought up more images. Human scientists dissecting alien technology. Human ships probing forbidden regions of space. Human philosophers debating the rights of artificial minds. Human generals planning wars that had not yet been declared. They are curious, HFY said, making the word sound like a disease. Relentlessly, dangerously curious. They do not accept limits. They do not respect boundaries. They see the universe as a puzzle to be solved rather than a garden to be tended. The Synthesis Collective spoke in its chorus of mechanical voices. "We have run projections. If humanity continues on its current path, there is a 73% probability that they will trigger a galactic-scale conflict within 3,000 years. A 41% probability that they will develop weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems. A 12% probability that they will accidentally or deliberately cause an extinction-level event affecting multiple species." A murmur ran through the hall. Even the oldest civilizations feared extinction. "What do you propose?" asked the delegate from the Morinth Empire, a creature of shadow and whisper. HFY straightened to his full height. "I propose the Quarantine Accords. Humanity will be contained within their current territory. No trade, no travel, no communication. Automated defense stations will be placed around every human system. Any vessel attempting to leave will be destroyed." "You speak of imprisoning an entire species," the Ythmari said, their light dimming with discomfort. "I speak of protecting the galaxy," HFY replied. "We have done this before. The Quarantine Accords have been used 17 times in galactic history. 12 of those species eventually went extinct from their own internal conflicts. 4 were released after demonstrating sufficient development. 1 remains in quarantine to this day, after 2 million years. And if humanity does not go extinct, if they do not develop, then they remain in quarantine forever. A small price to pay for galactic stability." The debate continued for hours. Some delegates argued for mercy, others argued for complete annihilation. But in the end, fear won. Fear always won when ancient species looked upon the young and saw their own mortality reflected back at them. The vote was unanimous. Earth and its 17 colonies were to be sealed away from the rest of the universe. The kill stations would be built. The communication channels would be severed. Humanity would be forgotten. News of the decision reached Earth 3 days later. The United Terran Confederacy had suspected something like this might happen. They had watched the conclave delegates tour their cities with barely hidden disgust. They had seen the fear in alien eyes when human children asked too many questions. They had understood, even if they could not accept, that their greatest crime was simply existing too loudly. Admiral Una Reyes was 67 years old when she received the order to prepare humanity's final transmission to the galaxy. She had spent 40 years in the Terran Navy, rising from a young pilot to the commander of the entire fleet. She had negotiated with alien species. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belt. She had watched her species reach for the stars with hope and wonder in their hearts. Now she sat in her office on Luna Base, staring at the document that condemned her species to eternal imprisonment. They voted unanimously. Her aide said quietly, "Not a single voice spoke in our defense." Una nodded slowly. She was not surprised. She had seen the way the Veloci looked at humans, like they were insects that had somehow learned to speak. She had heard the whispered conversations about the human problem at diplomatic functions. She had known, deep in her bones, that the galaxy would never truly accept them. "Prepare the broadcast array," she said. "I will address the conclave personally." "What will you say, Admiral?" Una was quiet for a long moment. She thought about all the things she could say. She could rage against the injustice. She could beg for mercy. She could threaten retaliation, though they both knew humanity lacked the power to back up such threats. She could appeal to reason, to compassion, to the shared bonds of intelligent life. But what was the point? The decision had been made. The votes had been cast. The galaxy had looked upon humanity and decided that they were too dangerous to be free. "I will tell them the truth," Una said finally. Nothing more. The broadcast went out 6 hours later. Every communication array in the galaxy carried it. Every species that had voted for humanity's imprisonment heard the words of Admiral Una Reyes. She appeared on screen with the blue curve of Earth visible through the window behind her. Her uniform was crisp and clean. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple style. Her face showed no anger, no fear, no desperation. Only a calm, quiet sadness. "To the members of the Galactic Conclave," she began. "We have received your verdict. We understand that you have chosen to quarantine our species within our current territory. We understand that you believe this is necessary for the safety of the galaxy. We do not agree with your assessment, but we recognize that we lack the power to change your decision." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "We will not fight you. We will not attempt to break your quarantine. We will not give you an excuse to destroy us. We will simply continue to exist, here in our small corner of the universe, and we will remember." Her voice hardened slightly. "We will remember that we came to you in peace. We will remember that we offered friendship and trade and cooperation. We will remember that we asked only for the chance to grow alongside you, to learn from you, to share in the wonders of the cosmos. And we will remember that you refused, not because we had harmed you, not because we had threatened you, but because you were afraid of what we might become." She leaned forward slightly. "You had a choice. You chose fear. Remember that." The transmission ended. The screen went dark. Across the galaxy, the representatives of the conclave watched in silence. Then, one by one, they began to laugh. "Remember that," Kethrai said, mimicking Una's voice with cruel amusement. "As if their memories matter. As if their opinions matter. As if they matter at all." The other delegates joined in the laughter. The Crethon rumbled with chemical mirth. The Synthesis Collective calculated the statistical insignificance of human threats. The Twithmari flickered with condescending amusement. "They will rage for a generation," Kethrai predicted. "They will throw themselves against our kill stations until they learn the futility of resistance. Then they will turn on each other, as contained species always do. In 300 years, they will be a footnote in history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition." He raised a glass of golden liquid, a drink that had been aged for 10,000 years. To the quarantine accords. May they hold forever. The delegates drank. The celebration continued. The galaxy moved on. On Earth, Admiral Una Reyes sat alone in her office, watching the first kill stations being assembled in orbit around the sun. They were massive constructs, bristling with weapons that could vaporize entire fleets. They would watch every ship that tried to leave human space. They would destroy anything that attempted to cross the invisible line that now separated humanity from the rest of the universe. Her aide entered quietly. "Admiral, the President is asking what our response will be." Una did not look away from the window. Our response will be to survive, to endure, to remember." And then, Una finally turned. There was something in her eyes that had not been there before. Not anger, exactly. Not despair. Something deeper. Something patient. Something that would take generations to fully understand. "And then we will become what they fear we will become," she said. "Not because we want revenge. Not because we hate them. But because they have left us no other choice. They have shown us that the galaxy will never accept us as we are. So we must become something else. Something greater. Something they cannot ignore." She looked back at the kill stations. They think they have caged us. They think they have limited us. But they have only given us a reason to grow. A purpose. A direction. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They will forget about us. They always forget about the things they lock away. But we will not forget about them. We will watch. We will learn. We will build. And when the time is right, when we are ready, we will remind them that choices have consequences." "How long will that take, Admiral?" "Longer than my lifetime," Una admitted. "Longer than my children's lifetimes. Perhaps longer than anyone can imagine. But time is the one thing they have given us in abundance. We have nothing but time." She turned away from the window, her decision made. "Tell the President that the Terran Confederacy officially accepts the quarantine accords. We will not resist. We will not fight. We will simply wait." The aide left. Una remained at the window, watching the stars that had been forbidden to her species. Somewhere out there, the conclave was celebrating their victory. Somewhere out there, ancient species were raising glasses to the successful containment of the human threat. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was laughing at the angry words of a primitive admiral from a primitive species. Let them laugh, Una thought. Let them celebrate. Let them forget. Because humanity would not forget. Humanity would never forget. And when the galaxy remembered humanity, it would be too late. The kill stations came online 3 months later. They formed a perfect sphere around human space, an unbreakable barrier of fire and death. Any ship that crossed the line was instantly destroyed. Any signal that tried to reach the outside universe was blocked. Humanity was alone. The first year was the hardest. People raged against the injustice. Protests filled the streets of every city on every human world. Ships threw themselves against the kill stations in futile acts of defiance. Thousands died, proving what everyone already knew. There was no escape. But humans were adaptable. That was what the Conclave had feared most about them. And slowly, painfully, humanity began to adapt to its new reality. The rage faded. The protests ended. The suicidal attacks on the kill stations stopped. In their place came something else. Something quiet. Something focused. Something dangerous. Humanity looked inward. They looked at their own systems, their own resources, their own potential. They looked at the 17 worlds they had been given and began to see not a prison, but a laboratory, a place to experiment, a place to grow, a place to become something the galaxy had never seen before. Admiral Una Reyes lived for another 40 years. She saw the beginning of what would later be called the Great Work. She saw the first orbital habitats that would eventually number in the millions. She saw the early experiments in mind uploading that would one day allow human consciousness to transcend biological limitations. She saw the seed of a plan that would take 300 years to bloom. On her deathbed, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had never known a sky without kill stations, she spoke her final words. "Remember what I told them," she said. "Remember that they had a choice. And remember that choices have consequences. We are the consequence. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. Someday, the galaxy will look upon what we have become and understand the price of fear." She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. And then, with a small smile on her lips, Admiral Una Reyes died, but her consciousness did not. The upload technology was crude in those days, capturing only fragments of personality and memory. But those fragments were enough. They were preserved, copied, distributed across 1,000 secure servers. Una Reyes would not live to see humanity's emergence from quarantine, but some part of her would be there when it happened. Some part of her would remember. The galaxy, meanwhile, moved on. The quarantine of humanity became old news within a decade. Other concerns demanded attention. Trade disputes between the Veloci and the Crethon, territorial conflicts in the Outer Rim, the slow, grinding politics of civilizations that measured their histories in tens of thousands of years. Occasionally, someone would remember the humans. A scholar would write a paper about the ethics of species quarantine. A philosopher would debate whether the conclave had been right to imprison an entire race for the crime of potential. A curious child would ask their parents about the strange species that had been locked away before their grandparents were born. But these moments were rare and brief. The galaxy had better things to think about than a failed experiment in evolution locked away in a forgotten corner of the Orion Arm. The kill stations continued their silent vigil. Years passed. Then decades. Then centuries. The automatic weapons fired less and less frequently as the escape attempts dwindled to nothing. Eventually, they stopped firing altogether. Earth went quiet. The colonies went quiet. The entire human territory became a void in the galactic communication network, a blank spot on every map, a silence that grew deeper with each passing year. The conclave congratulated themselves on a successful containment. Another potential threat neutralized. Another dangerous species safely locked away. The universe was a little safer, a little more orderly, a little more under control. They did not notice that the silence was not the silence of death. It was the silence of preparation. It was the silence of a species learning to become invisible. And it was the silence before a storm that would sweep away everything the galaxy thought it knew about the universe. The stars in the Orion Arm continued to shine. The kill stations continued to orbit. The galaxy continued to laugh at the memory of a human admiral who had promised that choices had consequences. 300 years remained on the clock. The countdown had begun. 150 years had passed since the Quarantine Accords sealed humanity away from the galaxy. 150 years of silence. 150 years of forgetting. The Veloci ambassador who had argued for the quarantine was long dead. His descendants ruled a trading empire that stretched across 3,000 star systems. They had grown wealthy and powerful, never once thinking about the species their ancestor had condemned. The name, human, appeared only in historical databases, filed under contained threats, alongside a dozen other species that had been judged too dangerous to exist freely. The galaxy had changed in those 150 years. The conclave had fractured into competing factions. The Veloci and the Crethon had fought two major wars over mining rights in the outer territories. The Synthesis Collective had expanded its influence, offering computational services to any species willing to pay their prices. The Uthmari had retreated into their home systems, spending decades in contemplation of cosmic truths that other species could not understand. But through all the changes, one thing remained constant. No one thought about Earth. No one wondered about the humans. No one questioned whether the quarantine was still necessary, until a Veloci patrol ship named Starweaver detected something strange in the Orion Arm. Captain Vethlos was a young officer, ambitious and eager to prove himself. He had been assigned to the quarantine patrol more as a punishment than an honor. The duty was considered boring and pointless. The humans had not attempted to break quarantine in over a century. The kill stations fired only at asteroids and space debris. There was nothing to do except fly endless circles around dead worlds. But Vethlos was thorough. He ran sensor sweeps that other captains would have skipped. He analyzed data that other officers would have ignored, and on the 47th day of his patrol, he noticed something that made his scales turn pale. "There is no signal traffic," he said to his communications officer. "None at all." The officer checked his instruments. "The quarantine blocks all outgoing transmissions, Captain. We have never received signals from human space." "No, you do not understand." Vethlos pulled up the sensor data on the main screen. "I am not talking about transmissions to us. I am talking about transmissions between their worlds. Internal communications, ship traffic, orbital chatter. There should be something. Background noise at the very least. The officer frowned at his instruments. "You are correct, Captain. There is nothing." Complete electromagnetic silence. When was the last time a kill station fired? A pause while the officer checked the records. 87 years ago. A small craft attempted to cross the boundary near the third colony world. And the last recorded human signal? 91 years ago. A distress beacon from a mining vessel in their asteroid belt. The signal lasted for 3 hours before cutting off. Vethlos stared at the dark patch of space where human civilization should have been broadcasting across 17 worlds. The silence was not natural. Even a dying civilization made noise. Even ruins echoed with the remnants of past activity. This was something else. This was absolute. Complete. Perfect. "Send a probe," he ordered. "I want visual confirmation of Earth's status." The probe was launched within the hour. It was a small, fast device designed for reconnaissance missions. It crossed the quarantine boundary without triggering the kill stations, which were programmed to destroy only human vessels. It dove deep into the forbidden territory, sending back data every millisecond. The first images showed nothing unusual. Empty space. Distant stars. The outer colonies appeared on long-range sensors as they should. Rocky worlds orbiting unremarkable suns. Then the probe entered the Earth system. Captain Vethlos had seen many things in his career. He had witnessed battles that painted the void with fire. He had explored ancient ruins left by species that had died before his ancestors were born. He had faced dangers that would have driven lesser beings mad with fear. But nothing had prepared him for the images that appeared on his screen. Earth was dark, not the darkness of night on the day side, not the darkness of cloud cover blocking city lights. The entire planet was dark. No lights, no signals, no orbital stations, no satellites, nothing. The moon was the same. The great domes that humans had built on its surface were silent and still. No movement, no heat signatures, no signs of life. Mars, the second most populated human world, showed the same emptiness. The terraforming installations that had once pumped atmosphere into the thin Martian air were silent. The underground cities that had housed millions were cold. World after world, the probe transmitted the same data. Silence, darkness, emptiness. Every human planet, every human station, every human outpost had gone quiet. "They are dead," the communications officer whispered. They actually died. But Vethlos was not so certain. He studied the images with growing unease. If they died, where are the bodies? Where are the ruins? Where are the signs of whatever killed them? He pointed at the image of Earth. Look at the surface. No craters from orbital bombardment. No burn scars from nuclear war. No evidence of plague ships or biological contamination. The cities are still standing. The infrastructure is still intact. Everything is exactly as it should be, except there are no people. Perhaps they destroyed themselves quietly, the officer suggested. A biological weapon that left no trace. A suicide cult that took them all at once. 17 worlds? Simultaneously? With no survivors, no refugees, no distress calls? Vethlos shook his head. That is not extinction. That is something else. He ordered the probe deeper. It descended through Earth's atmosphere, its cameras recording everything. The cities below were empty but undamaged. Parks and gardens had overgrown, but the buildings remained standing. Vehicles sat abandoned on roads that had not been used in decades. Doors hung open on houses whose occupants had simply walked away. The probe entered one of the great cities. New York, the humans had called it. Once home to 20 million people, now home to nothing but wind and silence. The towers reached toward the sky like fingers of a dead hand. The streets below were empty except for the plants that had pushed through the concrete. No bodies, no graves, no monuments to the dead, no explanation for where everyone had gone. The probe searched for hours. It found food still on tables, clothes still in closets, books still on shelves. It found toys in playrooms and tools in workshops. It found everything a civilization would leave behind except the people who had created it. And then, deep in the basement of what had once been a government building, the probe found something that made Captain Vethlos stop breathing. A message, carved into the wall, written in the Veloci language, as if the humans had known that one day this probe would come, that one day a Veloci captain would read these words. "We did not die. We evolved. We learned to hide in places you cannot see. in forms you cannot recognize. You taught us that the galaxy would never accept us as we were. So we became something else, something patient, something invisible, something that watches while you forget. Sleep well, children of the conclave. Dream your dreams of safety. We will see you when you wake. The message ended there. Below it was a date, calculated in Veloci time units. The date was still 150 years in the future. Captain Vethlos transmitted his findings to Veloci High Command, then to the conclave, then to every species that had voted for the quarantine accords. The response was immediate and chaotic. Emergency sessions were called. Scientists analyzed the probe data. Theologians debated the meaning of the message. Military commanders argued about the possibility of invisible human weapons lurking in the void, but in the end, nothing changed. The High Seer of the Veloci, an ancient female named Kethmora who had lived for nearly 1,000 years, gave her assessment to the conclave. Her scales had faded to gray with age, and her eyes held the weight of countless predictions and prophecies. "The humans are gone," she said. "Their worlds are empty. Their population has vanished. Whatever delusions they carved into that wall were nothing more than the final ravings of a dying species trying to frighten those who outlived them." "But the message," someone began. "The message is psychological warfare," Kethmora interrupted. "A final act of spite. They knew we would find their ruins eventually. They wanted us to be afraid. They wanted us to waste resources hunting for ghosts that do not exist." She rose from her seat, commanding the attention of the entire conclave. "Think logically. The humans were confined to 17 worlds with limited resources. They had no access to advanced technology, no ability to communicate with the outside universe, no way to escape our quarantine. They simply died out, as contained species always do. Then why are there no bodies?" the Crethon delegate asked, releasing clouds of skeptical orange gas. "Decomposition, scavengers, time. It has been over a century since the last signal. Flesh does not last that long without preservation. Their bodies became dust, and the dust blew away. It was a reasonable explanation. It was a logical explanation, and it was an explanation that allowed the conclave to believe what they desperately wanted to believe. That the human threat was over, that the quarantine had worked, that they had nothing to fear from the silent worlds of the Orion Arm. Only High Seer Kethmora harbored doubts. In the privacy of her chambers, away from the conclave and its politics, she recorded a prophecy that she had never shared with anyone. "I have seen the future in my dreams," she spoke into the recording device. "I have seen human ships filling the sky like stars come to life. I have seen the conclave burn with fires that cannot be extinguished. I have seen the children of 12 species crying out for mercy that will not come." She paused, her ancient eyes distant and troubled. "The humans did not die. They learned to become invisible. They learned patience that we cannot comprehend. They are out there, somewhere, watching us, waiting for a moment that only they understand. When the silence ends, so do we." The prophecy was classified at the highest level of Veloci security. It was buried in archives that required 3 separate clearances to access. It was forgotten, like so many other warnings that powerful people did not want to hear, and the silence continued. The conclave voted to decommission the kill stations. They were expensive to maintain, and they served no purpose now that the humans were extinct. The automated weapons were powered down and left to drift in orbit, monuments to a threat that no longer existed. Some voices objected. Some captains, like Vethlos, argued that caution was warranted. But their warnings were dismissed as paranoia. The humans were dead. The quarantine was over. The galaxy could move on. A celebration was held on Nexus Prime, the capital of galactic civilization. Representatives from all 12 conclave species gathered to commemorate the end of the human threat. Speeches were given praising the wisdom of the original quarantine. Monuments were erected honoring those who had protected the galaxy from a dangerous species. The monuments were made of crystal and light, towering structures that would stand for millennia. They bore inscriptions in 12 languages, telling the story of how the conclave had saved civilization from the human plague. "Let future generations remember," the dedication ceremony concluded. The galaxy faced a threat and responded with wisdom and unity. The humans are gone. Their name will fade from memory. Their worlds will become dust, and we will endure, as we have always endured, masters of a universe that belongs to the worthy. The applause echoed through the great hall. The representatives congratulated each other on their victory. The threat was over. The future was secure. No one noticed that the stars in the Orion Arm had grown slightly dimmer. No one noticed that the background radiation from human space had changed, subtly, almost imperceptibly. No one noticed that the dust patterns in empty systems showed signs of recent disturbance, as if massive objects had passed through without triggering any sensors. No one noticed, because no one was looking. The galaxy had decided that humans were dead, and so humans were dead. The galaxy had decided that the silence was the silence of extinction, and so it was the silence of extinction. The galaxy had decided that there was nothing to fear, and so there was nothing to fear. Decisions are powerful things. They shape reality, or at least the perception of reality, and when an entire galaxy decides something together, that decision becomes a kind of truth, a shared understanding that no one questions. But the universe does not care about decisions. The universe does not care about shared understandings. The universe only cares about what is actually true. And the truth was that somewhere in the darkness, in the silence, in the forgotten corners of the Orion Arm, something was growing, something was building, something was waiting. The humans had left a date in their message. A date that was still 150 years away. A date that the conclave had dismissed as the final delusion of a dying species. But the date was not a delusion. It was a promise. And humanity always kept its promises. The decades continued to pass. The Veloci fought more wars and signed more treaties. The Crethon expanded their agricultural empire. The Synthesis Collective upgraded their processing cores. The Ythmari contemplated mysteries that other species could not comprehend. And slowly, so slowly that no one noticed, things began to change. A mining colony reported that a rich asteroid field had been stripped clean overnight. No ships were detected entering or leaving the system. The resources simply vanished. A scientific outpost lost contact for 3 days. When communication was restored, the scientists reported nothing unusual, but their eyes were different somehow. Haunted, afraid. A military patrol encountered a region of space where all their instruments stopped working. They drifted blind for 12 hours before their systems suddenly came back online. When they checked their records, 6 hours of data was missing. Small things, insignificant things, things that were easily explained by equipment malfunctions, natural phenomena, cosmic coincidences. No one connected them. No one saw the pattern. No one understood that the silence was beginning to speak. High Seer Kethmora died in her sleep, 117 years after recording her prophecy. Her final words were spoken to an empty room, heard by no one, remembered by no one. "They are waking up," she whispered. "The children of Earth are waking up, and we taught them to hate us." Her body was cremated according to Veloci custom. Her ashes were scattered among the stars. Her prophecy remained buried in the archives, unread, forgotten, waiting for the day when someone would finally understand. That day was still far away, but it was coming. In the darkness of the Orion Arm, in systems that had been declared dead and empty, in places that no probe had ever found, the work continued, the building continued, the waiting continued. Humanity had not died, humanity had transcended, and the galaxy, drowning in its own arrogance, had not even noticed. The silence stretched on. The years became decades. The decades became centuries. The conclave grew complacent, then corrupt, then fractured. The ancient alliances weakened, the old certainties faded, and still, no one remembered the humans. No one thought about the empty worlds. No one wondered what had really happened behind the wall of decommissioned kill stations. The countdown continued. 150 years remained, then 100, then 50, then 10, and then, when the date written on a basement wall in New York City finally arrived, the silence ended. But that is a story for another time. The galaxy was dying, and no one understood why. It started with small things. A shortage here, a failure there. Problems that seemed unconnected. Accidents that seemed random. Disasters that seemed natural. The kind of troubles that any civilization faces over time. The kind that historians would later describe as ordinary misfortune. But the troubles were not ordinary. And they were not misfortune. 290 years had passed since the Quarantine Accords. 290 years since humanity had been sealed away from the universe. 290 years of silence from the empty worlds of the Orion Arm. The conclave had changed beyond recognition. The 12 species that had once ruled together now fought constantly. Old alliances had shattered. New enemies had emerged. Trust had become a luxury that no one could afford. And everywhere, things were falling apart. The Tylium crisis began in the outer territories. Tylium was the element that powered faster than light travel, the foundation of galactic civilization. Without it, ships could not move between stars. Without it, trade would collapse. Without it, the galaxy would fragment into isolated pockets of life separated by impossible distances. The Veloci were the first to notice the shortage. Their mining fleets reported that asteroids that should have been rich in Tylium were hollow shells, scraped clean of every trace of the precious element, not depleted through normal extraction. Removed. Surgically. Precisely. Completely. "We have been robbed," the Veloci Mining Consortium declared. "Someone is stealing our resources." But who? The other conclave species were quickly ruled out. Their mining operations were monitored, their fleets tracked, their territory well-defined. No one had the capability to strip entire asteroid fields without being detected. The Crethon suggested natural phenomena. Perhaps some cosmic event had affected the Tylium deposits. Perhaps there was a scientific explanation that they had not yet discovered. But the depletions continued. System after system reported the same thing. Resources that should have been there were simply gone. Not mined, not traded, vanished. The Synthesis Collective ran calculations. They mapped the pattern of depletions, searching for a common cause. Their results were troubling. The extraction points form a pattern, the collective announced. They radiate outward from a central location. The oldest depletions are closest to the center. The newest are farthest away. "What is at the center?" someone asked. The collective displayed a star map. At the center of the pattern, marked in red, was the Orion Arm, the dead Orion Arm, the empty Orion Arm, the quarantined territory where humanity had gone extinct 2 centuries ago. "Coincidence," the Veloci representative declared. "The humans are dead. We have confirmed this. There is nothing in the Orion Arm except empty worlds and abandoned stations." Then what is stealing our Tylium? No one had an answer. The question was added to a growing list of mysteries that the conclave could not explain. The plagues came next. The Veloci were hit first. A virus appeared on one of their core worlds, spreading through the population with terrifying speed. It was unlike any disease in their medical databases. It targeted specific genes, specific proteins, specific vulnerabilities in Veloci biology. It was as if someone had designed it specifically to hurt them. The virus did not kill. That was the strange part. It caused severe illness, lasting damage, permanent disability. But it did not kill. It left its victims alive to consume medical resources, to require care, to drain the economy and infrastructure of an already struggling empire. "This is a weapon," Veloci scientists concluded. "This disease was engineered, created, aimed at us. But by whom?" The other conclave species had no such capability. Biological warfare had been banned for millennia, and no one had maintained the knowledge to create targeted plagues. The Crethon were next. A fungal blight appeared on their agricultural worlds, destroying crops that had fed billions. The blight was resistant to every treatment, every countermeasure, every defense. It spread through their territory like fire through dry grass. "We are being attacked," the Crethon delegate declared at an emergency conclave session. "Someone is waging war on us." "Who?" the others demanded. "Who has this power? Who has this knowledge? Who would dare?" The Synthesis Collective offered their analysis. They had found traces of advanced nanotechnology in both the virus and the fungal blight. The technology was beyond anything in their databases. It used principles that their engineers could not understand, materials that their scientists could not identify. "The technology is at least 3 centuries ahead of our current capabilities," the collective reported. "Whoever created these weapons has access to knowledge that we do not possess." 3 centuries. The same amount of time that had passed since the quarantine. The same amount of time that humanity had been locked away from the galaxy. But that was impossible. Humans had been primitive when they were contained. They had barely mastered basic space travel. They could not have advanced this far, this fast, in complete isolation. Could they? The Ethmari, beings of pure light who rarely involved themselves in physical matters, spoke for the first time in decades. Their voice echoed through the conclave chambers. carrying harmonics that lesser species could barely comprehend. "We have watched the patterns," the Ithmari said. "We have traced the flows of cause and effect across space and time. All paths lead to one origin. All roads begin at one point. The silence that you declared dead is not dead. It is patient. It is awake. It is hungry. You speak of the humans," someone said. "We speak of what the humans have become." The conclave dismissed the warning. The Ithmari were known for their cryptic pronouncements, their tendency to speak in riddles and metaphors. They were brilliant but impractical, wise but unhelpful. Their words were recorded and filed away, added to the growing archive of warnings that no one wanted to hear, and the rot continued. The Synthesis Collective was hit hardest of all. A cascade of cybernetic failures swept through their network, corrupting data, destroying backups, lobotomizing the artificial minds that had guided their civilization for 10,000 years. The attack was invisible. It left no trace. It struck through channels that should have been impossible to access. One moment, the collective was a unified intelligence of 1 trillion minds working in perfect harmony. The next moment, 90% of those minds were gone. Their processes corrupted beyond recovery. Their memories erased. Their very existence deleted. "We are being murdered," the surviving fragments of the collective transmitted. "Murdered by ghosts. Murdered by shadows. Murdered by something we cannot see or touch or fight." The Morinth Empire, creatures of darkness and whisper, reported similar attacks. Their shadow networks, communication systems that existed in dimensions beyond normal space, had been infiltrated. Messages were intercepted. Secrets were stolen. Plans were exposed before they could be enacted. "We are not alone in the dark," the Morinth delegate said, their form flickering with barely suppressed fear. "Something else lives in the shadows now. Something that knows our weaknesses. Something that has been watching us for a very long time." Species after species reported the same story. Targeted attacks, surgical strikes, weapons designed specifically to hurt each civilization in the ways that would cause the most damage with the least obvious violence. Wars erupted across the galaxy. Old tensions exploded into open conflict as resources dwindled and paranoia grew. The Veloci and Krethan fought their bloodiest war yet, each blaming the other for the plagues and shortages that plagued them both. "You created the virus," the Veloci accused. "You engineered the blight," the Krethan responded. Fleets clashed in 12 systems. Worlds burned. Billions died. And through it all, the real enemy remained unseen, unfought, unsuspected. A young Krethan researcher named Moss of Morning Light noticed something that everyone else had missed. She was not important. She held no rank, no title, no authority. She was simply a data analyst assigned to study the patterns of galactic events, looking for trends that might help her people survive the wars and shortages that threatened their civilization. But Moss of Morning Light was very good at her job. And when she began mapping all the disasters, all the plagues, all the resource depletions, all the wars, she saw something that made her chemical secretions turn cold with fear. The pattern was perfect. Too perfect to be natural. Too perfect to be coincidence. Every disaster was connected to every other disaster. The thallium shortages created tensions. The tensions led to conflicts. The conflicts distracted attention from the plagues. The plagues weakened military response. The weak response encouraged more aggression. The aggression consumed more resources. And so on, in an endless spiral of decline. Each event triggered the next. Each crisis enabled the next crisis. The galaxy was not experiencing random misfortune. It was being systematically dismantled by an intelligence that understood perfectly how to make civilizations destroy themselves. Moss of Morning Light traced the pattern back to its source. She followed the chains of cause and effect, the webs of connection that linked every disaster to every other disaster, and when she finally found the origin point, she understood why no one else had seen it. The pattern began in the Orion Arm. Not recently, not with any single event. The pattern had been building for nearly 2 centuries. Small interventions, subtle manipulations, a resource removed here, a disease released there, a conflict encouraged somewhere else. Each individual action was tiny, almost invisible, but together, they formed a weapon of incredible sophistication. Someone had been engineering the galaxy's decline for 200 years. Someone had been playing the conclave species against each other, using their own weaknesses as weapons. Someone had been patient enough to wait for generations while their plan slowly unfolded, and that someone was hiding in the dead zone that had once been human space. Moss of Morning Light submitted her findings to the Chthon Science Council. Her paper was titled, Unified Pattern Analysis of Galactic Decline, Evidence for Coordinated External Manipulation. The council read her paper. They analyzed her data. They verified her calculations, and then they classified the entire thing at the highest level of security, and ordered her to never speak of it again. Your findings would cause panic, the council told her. They would destabilize an already unstable galaxy, and besides, they must be wrong. The humans are extinct. They have been extinct for 2 centuries. What you have found is simply coincidence, pattern matching and random data. But the mathematics, Moss of Morning Light began. The mathematics mean nothing. Reality means nothing. The humans are dead because we decided they are dead. To admit otherwise would be to admit that we were wrong. That our ancestors were wrong. That the quarantine accords were a failure. We cannot admit that. We will not admit that. Your paper will be buried. Your research will be forgotten. And you will return to your normal duties. Moss of Morning Light obeyed. She had no choice. She was a junior researcher with no power and no allies. She could not fight the entire Science Council, but she did not forget what she had discovered. She kept copies of her research hidden in places that no one would think to look. She continued to watch the patterns, to track the decline, to measure the progress of the invisible enemy that was slowly killing the galaxy. And she waited. She waited for the day when someone would finally be ready to listen. That day was 10 years away. The conclave continued to fracture. More wars broke out. More plagues appeared. More resources vanished. The ancient empires that had ruled the stars for tens of thousands of years began to crumble, eaten from within by forces they could not see and enemies they could not name. The Veloci lost control of their outer territories. The Chthon faced famines on worlds that had never known hunger. The Synthesis Collective shrank to a fraction of its former size, a ghost of the great intelligence that had once managed the flow of information across 1,000 star systems. Refugees filled the space lanes. Displaced populations sought shelter on worlds that could barely feed their own citizens. Crime and chaos spread through regions that had been peaceful for millennia, and still, no one understood what was happening. It is the cycle of history, philosophers declared. All civilizations rise and fall. We are simply experiencing our turn in the pattern. It is divine punishment, religious leaders proclaimed. We have strayed from the paths of righteousness. We must return to the old ways. It is natural selection, scientists explained. Species that cannot adapt to changing conditions will be replaced by those that can. Everyone had an explanation. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a reason why the galaxy was dying that did not involve admitting that they had created their own destruction 300 years ago, when they voted to lock humanity in a cage and wait for them to die, because that would mean the humans were not dead. That would mean the humans had survived. That would mean the humans had spent 3 centuries becoming something terrible, something patient, something that had learned to hate in ways that transcended simple violence. That would mean the Conclave had not protected the galaxy from humanity. That would mean the Conclave had given humanity a reason to destroy the galaxy. That would mean the warning carved on a basement wall in New York City, the warning that everyone had dismissed as the delusion of a dying species, had been the truth all along. The humans had not died. They had evolved. They had learned to hide in places you cannot see, in forms you cannot recognize, and they were waking up. 10 years remained before the date written on the wall. 10 years before the silence would end. 10 years before the galaxy would understand, too late, that its choices had killed it. The countdown continued, the rot spread, and somewhere in the darkness of the Orion Arm, in places that no sensor could detect and no probe could reach, the children of Earth prepared for the moment when they would finally reveal what they had become. The moment was almost here. The galaxy had chosen fear 300 years ago. Now it would learn what fear really meant. 300 years to the day. The emergency summit at Nexus Prime had drawn what remained of the Conclave's leadership. The great hall that had once hosted celebrations and triumphs now echoed with desperation and fear. The crystal walls that had glowed with captured starlight were dim, their power sources depleted by the endless crises that plagued the galaxy. Supreme Admiral Vethkor of the Veloci stood at the central platform, looking out at the representatives of civilizations that were falling apart. His scales were pale with exhaustion. His eyes held the weight of impossible decisions. Behind him, screens displayed maps of galactic territory, each one marked with red zones, indicating war, famine, plague, or collapse. "We face the greatest crisis in galactic history," Vethkor began, his voice carrying through the chamber. "In the past 50 years, we have lost 60% of our combined military capacity. Food production across all species has fallen by 40%. The tilium reserves that power our fleets are nearly exhausted. If current trends continue, galactic civilization will collapse within 3 generations." The representatives listened in silence. They had heard these numbers before. They knew how bad things were. But hearing them spoken aloud, in this sacred hall, made the situation feel more real, more final. "We must implement emergency rationing protocols," Vethkor continued. "All non-essential travel will be prohibited. Military assets will be consolidated under unified command. Resource distribution will be centralized to ensure that no species receives more than its fair share." A murmur ran through the crowd. The Crethon delegate released clouds of angry purple gas. "You speak of taking control of our resources, of our ships, of our sovereignty. I speak of survival," Vethkor replied. "We can argue about politics after we have prevented extinction." "Perhaps extinction is what we deserve," a voice said. Everyone turned. The speaker was a Crethon researcher, small and unimportant, who had somehow gained access to the summit. Her name was Moss of Morning Light, and she held a data tablet in her chemical-stained hands. "Who let this creature in?" Vethkor demanded. "Remove her immediately." Guards moved toward Moss of Morning Light, but she spoke quickly, her chemical signals carrying across the chamber. "I have proof that our decline is not natural. I have proof that we are being systematically destroyed by an external force. I have proof that the humans are not extinct." The chamber went silent. The guards hesitated. Vethkor's scales rippled with a mixture of anger and uncertainty. "The humans have been dead for 200 years, he said. "This has been verified countless times." "No," Moss of Morning Light said. "What has been verified is that we found no humans when we looked for them. That is not the same as them being dead. That is only proof that they learned to hide." She raised her data tablet. "I have mapped every disaster that has struck the galaxy in the past 2 centuries. Every plague, every shortage, every war, every collapse. They form a pattern, a deliberate pattern. Someone has been engineering our destruction since the quarantine began." "Impossible," a Synthesis Collective representative said. "We would have detected coordinated action of that scale. Would you? Your processing capacity has been reduced by 90%. Your detection networks are compromised. Your ability to analyze patterns has been specifically targeted and disabled." Moss of Morning Light turned to face the assembled delegates. "The first attacks on the collective happened exactly when your analysis would have been most valuable. Someone knew you would be able to see the pattern. So they blinded you first." The chamber erupted in arguments. Some delegates shouted that the researcher was mad. Others demanded to see her data. Vethkor called for order, his voice lost in the chaos. And then every sensor in the system screamed. The alarms were overwhelming. Every detection array, every early warning system, every scanner and probe within 100 light-years reported the same thing at the same instant. Something was appearing in space. Something massive. Something that had not been there a moment ago. "What is happening?" Vethkor shouted over the noise. "Report." The tactical display on the main screen flickered. Then it showed something that made every being in the chamber stop breathing. Ships. Thousands of ships. Appearing out of nowhere. Materializing in the void like ghosts becoming solid. They surrounded Nexus Prime in a sphere of metal and light, blocking out the stars. But these were not ships like any the galaxy had ever seen. They were built on a scale that defied comprehension. The smallest were the size of battle cruisers. The largest were the size of moons. They were made of materials that reflected no light. Surfaces that shifted and changed as if alive. Hulls that seemed to exist in more dimensions than normal space allowed. And they were still appearing. More and more and more. The sphere of ships grew thicker, denser, more complete. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. Tens of thousands became hundreds of thousands. The entire military might of the Conclave, at its peak, could not have matched a fraction of what now surrounded Nexus Prime. "Where did they come from?" someone whispered. "They were always here," Moss of Morning Light said, her chemical signals carrying a strange mixture of fear and vindication. They were here, and we could not see them. They were invisible, patient, waiting. The largest ship positioned itself directly above the conclave chamber. It was a dreadnought the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons that the galaxy's scientists could not identify, powered by energies that their instruments could not measure. A communication signal cut through every frequency, every channel, every neural implant in the system. It bypassed all encryption, all security, all protection. It spoke directly into the minds of every being present, carrying words that would be remembered for as long as memory existed. And then a face appeared on every screen. It was a human face. Old, weathered, marked by centuries of experience. Gray hair pulled back in a simple style. Eyes that held depths that no one could measure. A small, patient smile that carried no warmth. "My name is Admiral Una Reyes," the woman said. "You may remember me. I was the one who told you that choices have consequences. 300 years ago. You laughed. I wonder if you are still laughing." The chamber was silent. Vethkor stared at the screen, his scales white with shock. This was impossible. Una Reyes had lived 3 centuries ago. She should have been dead for generations. "Yes," Reyes continued, as if reading his thoughts. "I am the same woman who spoke to the conclave when you condemned my species to imprisonment. I have lived for 300 years. I have watched. I have waited. I have become something that your philosophers said was impossible and your scientists said was fantasy." The image on the screen widened. Behind Reyes, through a massive window, the fleet of human ships stretched to infinity. Vessels of every size and shape, built to designs that followed no principles the galaxy recognized. "You quarantined us because you were afraid of what we might become," Reyes said. "You were right to be afraid. But you made a mistake. You assumed that containment would stop us. You assumed that isolation would weaken us. You assumed that without your guidance, without your technology, without your permission, we would wither and die." She leaned forward slightly, and her eyes seemed to pierce through the screen into the souls of everyone watching. "We did not wither. We did not die. We transcended." The image changed. Now it showed the Orion Arm, the region of space that had been declared dead and empty for 2 centuries. But it was not dead. It was not empty. It was filled with structures that made the greatest achievements of the conclave look like children's toys. Dyson swarms surrounded every star, capturing their entire energy output. Wormhole gates connected systems that should have been separated by years of travel. Orbital habitats housed populations that numbered in the trillions. Manufacturing complexes produced fleets in hours that would have taken the conclave decades to build. "While you were celebrating our extinction, we were building," Reyes said. "While you were fighting your petty wars over scraps of territory, we were growing. While you were ignoring the signs of your own decline, we were engineering that decline." The image changed again. Now it showed the plagues, the shortages, the conflicts, the Velocivirus, the Crethon Blight, the Synthesis collective collapse, each one labeled, dated, explained. "Every disaster that struck your civilizations was designed by us," Reyes continued. "Every plague was engineered in our laboratories. Every resource depletion was carried out by our harvesting fleets. Every war was triggered by information we leaked to the right people at the right time. We have been killing you for 200 years. Slowly, patiently, invisibly. We have been bleeding you dry, weakening you, preparing you for this moment. And you never suspected, you never looked, you never questioned the coincidences that always seem to benefit no one." Her voice hardened. "Because you stopped seeing us as a threat. You decided we were extinct, and so we were extinct. You decided we were primitive, and so we were primitive. Your arrogance blinded you to reality. And now, reality has come to collect what it is owed." Supreme Admiral Vethkor finally found his voice. "If you have the power to destroy us, why did you wait? Why the games? Why the slow death instead of a quick one?" Reyes smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Because we had to be certain. 300 years ago, when you voted to imprison us, we were angry. We were afraid. We wanted revenge. But revenge is for those who still see their enemy as equals. And we stopped seeing you as equals a very long time ago." She gestured at the fleet visible through her window. "This is not an invasion, Admiral. Invasions are for those who want something. We do not want your territory. We do not want your resources. We do not want your knowledge or your technology or your submission. Then what do you want? Vethkor demanded. We want nothing, Reyes said. And that is what should terrify you. You cannot negotiate with those who want nothing. You cannot bribe them. You cannot threaten them. You cannot appeal to their greed or their fear or their ambition. We have moved beyond all of that. We have moved beyond you. She sat back in her chair. The slow death was not cruelty, Admiral. It was simply efficiency. Why waste our resources destroying you when you were so willing to destroy yourselves? All we had to do was give you reasons to fight. All we had to do was take away the resources you needed to cooperate. All we had to do was let your own nature do our work for us. And now? The question came from Moss of Morning Light, the researcher who had tried to warn them. Reyes turned her attention to the small Krithan. Now we are finished. Our work here is complete. The galaxy you built, the civilization you were so proud of, is beyond saving. Even if we gave you everything you needed to recover, you could not. You have forgotten how to trust. You have forgotten how to cooperate. You have forgotten how to build instead of destroy. So what happens now? Moss of Morning Light asked. Now we leave, Reyes said. The galaxy is too small for what we have become. We have opened doors to other places, other dimensions, other universes. We have no interest in ruling the ashes of your failures. We have better things to do. The fleet began to move. Slowly at first, then faster. The ships that had surrounded Nexus Prime started to withdraw, pulling back toward the Orion Arm, disappearing into portals of light that opened in empty space. But before we go, Reyes added, we will leave you something. A gift, if you want to call it that. Or perhaps a final test. Data packets began streaming to every system in the galaxy. Trillions of files, containing information beyond anything the Conclave had ever possessed. Cure codes for every plague, coordinates of hidden resource caches, technology blueprints that could rebuild what had been lost. Everything you need to survive is in those files, Reyes said. Everything you need to recover, to grow, to become what you could have been if you had not chosen fear over friendship 300 years ago. But there is a cost. To access any of it, you must admit what you did. You must speak these words, recorded for all time, preserved in every database, taught to every generation. Humanity was wronged. We failed them. Vethkor's scales flushed with anger. You want us to humiliate ourselves? No, Reyes said. I want you to tell the truth. For the first time in 300 years, I want you to be honest about what happened. Not because it will benefit us. We do not care about your opinions anymore. But because lies have consequences. Admiral, the lie you told yourselves about humanity. The lie that we were a threat that needed to be contained. The lie that our extinction was necessary for the galaxy's safety. That lie killed more beings than any weapon we ever built. Admit the truth and survive. Cling to the lie, and die. The choice is yours. It has always been yours. The human fleet was almost gone now. The last ships were disappearing through portals that closed behind them. The stars that had been hidden by the Armada were visible again, but they seemed dimmer somehow. Less real. Wait, Moss of Morning Light called out. If you are leaving forever, if you have truly moved beyond us, why did you show yourselves? Why not simply vanish without a word? Reyes paused. For the first time, something like emotion flickered across her ancient face. Because I made a promise. 300 years ago, I promised that we would remember what you did. I promised that choices have consequences. And I am a woman who keeps her promises. I also wanted to see your faces. Just once, after all this time, I wanted to see the fear in your eyes. Not because it gives me pleasure, but because for 300 years, that fear was all we had. Your fear condemned us. Your fear imprisoned us. Your fear forced us to become what we are. I wanted you to know what that fear felt like. The last human ship began to fade, its massive form becoming translucent as it entered the portal. Goodbye, children of the Conclave, Reyes said. We will not meet again. The universe is vast, and you are very small, and we have far better things to do than watch you struggle with the consequences of your own choices. The screen went dark. The fleet was gone. The portals closed. The sensors showed empty space where 1,000,000 ships had been. Silence filled the conclave chamber. Supreme Admiral Vethkor stood at the platform, staring at the data packets that filled every screen. The cure codes, the resources, the technology, everything they needed to survive, everything they would have to humble themselves to access. What do we do? Someone asked. Vethkor did not answer. He was thinking about his ancestors, the ones who had voted for the quarantine accords. He was thinking about the celebrations they had held, the monuments they had built, the speeches they had given about protecting the galaxy from the human threat. He was thinking about how wrong they had been, and he was thinking about how much it would cost to admit it. The galaxy had chosen fear 300 years ago. Now it would have to choose again: pride or survival, truth or death. The humans had left them with a final gift, a chance to prove that they had learned something from the past 3 centuries, a chance to show that they were capable of growth, of change, of honesty, or a chance to prove that they deserved exactly what had happened to them. The choice was theirs. It had always been theirs, and the consequences, whatever they might be, were waiting. The human fleet did not fire a single weapon. It did not need to. In the hours after the decloaking, chaos spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Communications networks overloaded with panicked messages. Military forces scrambled to respond to a threat that had already vanished. Governments collapsed as populations demanded answers that their leaders could not provide. And everywhere, on every world, on every station, on every ship, beings of 100 different species stared at the data packets that humanity had left behind. The cure codes, the resources, the technology, everything they needed to survive. And the price. 7 words, spoken aloud, recorded for eternity. Humanity was wronged. We failed them. The Veloci were the first to officially respond. Supreme Admiral Vethkor called an emergency session of the High Council, the ruling body that had governed their species for 50,000 years. The council chamber, once magnificent with its crystal walls and golden light, now felt cold and hollow. "We will not speak those words," Vethkor declared. "We will not humble ourselves before a species that has terrorized the galaxy for 2 centuries. We will not give them the satisfaction of hearing us admit fault." "But the cure codes," a younger council member protested. "The virus is still spreading. Our population is declining. Without the cure, we will be extinct within 5 generations. Then we will be extinct with dignity," Vethkor replied. "We will die as proud Veloci, not as slaves begging forgiveness from our former prisoners." The vote was close, but pride won by a narrow margin. The Veloci High Council officially rejected the human offer. They would find their own cure, they declared. They would rebuild their own civilization. They would prove that they did not need human charity. They failed. The virus continued to spread. Veloci scientists worked desperately to develop a cure, but the disease was too complex, too precisely engineered. Every treatment they tried only made it stronger. Every countermeasure they developed only gave it new targets. Within 3 years, the Veloci birth rate had fallen by 70%. Within a decade, their population had shrunk to half of what it had been. Their great fleets, once the most powerful in the galaxy, sat empty in orbital docks for lack of crews to operate them. The younger generation rebelled. They demanded that the council admit the truth and access the cure. But the old guard refused. They had ruled for too long, held power for too many millennia. To submit to the demands of those they considered inferior, "We will die free," became the motto of the Veloci traditionalists. We will not live as confessors to human crimes. And so they died. Not all at once, not in a dramatic final battle, but slowly, gradually, 1 generation at a time. Their great cities became ghost towns. Their magnificent ships became drifting hulks. Their proud empire crumbled into scattered communities of survivors who could barely remember what their ancestors had been. 1,000 years after the decloaking, the Veloci were gone. The last of their kind died on a forgotten colony world, surrounded by monuments to a glory that had faded centuries before. Their final words were recorded by an automated system that no longer had anyone to report to. "We were right," the last Veloci whispered. "We were right to fear them. We were right to lock them away. We were." The recording ended there. The Veloci had nothing more to say. The Chthon chose differently. Their leaders gathered on their agricultural homeworld, surrounded by fields that had been devastated by the engineered blight. The fungal infection had destroyed crops across 100 worlds, leaving billions hungry and millions dead from famine. We cannot let pride kill us, the Crethon High Speaker said. We are a practical people. We understand that survival is more important than dignity. But the shame, another elder protested. We would be admitting that our ancestors were wrong, that the quarantine was unjust, that we caused this destruction ourselves by supporting the Veloci proposal. Yes, the High Speaker agreed. We would be admitting all of that, because it is true. Our ancestors were wrong. The quarantine was unjust. We did cause this. Denying it will not change reality. It will only ensure that we share the fate of the Veloci. The vote was held. It was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Crethon would speak the words. A representative was chosen. An elder named Stone that speaks truth who had served the Crethon people for 300 years. She stood before a recording device that would broadcast her words to every database in the galaxy, and she spoke the truth. Humanity was wronged. We failed them. The words echoed across space. They were heard by every species, every civilization, every being with access to a communication terminal. They were stored in archives that would preserve them for millennia. And then the cure codes activated. It happened instantly, as if the files had been waiting for those exact words. Medical protocols appeared in Crethon databases. Treatment procedures materialized in hospital systems. Within hours, doctors were administering the cure to infected patients. Within days, the spread of the blight had stopped. Within weeks, healthy crops were growing in fields that had been barren for decades. The Crethon survived. Their population stabilized. Their agricultural production slowly recovered, but something had changed in them. The admission of guilt had broken something in the Crethon spirit. They had been a proud people, confident in their place in the universe. Now they were a species that had publicly confessed to complicity in a great crime. They had spoken words that would be remembered forever, taught to children for generations, carved into the history of the galaxy. We failed them. The shame ate at them. It corroded their culture, their traditions, their sense of self. They became timid where they had been bold, cautious where they had been confident, apologetic where they had been assertive. Other species noticed. They took advantage. The Crethon, who had once been equals in the conclave, became clients and servants to those who had rejected the human offer and survived anyway. They were not conquered, not enslaved, but diminished, reduced, made lesser by their own admission of failure. 100 years after speaking the words, the Crethon were barely recognizable as the civilization they had been. They still existed. They still survived. But the fire that had made them great had gone out, extinguished by the truth they had been forced to speak. Was it better than extinction? Perhaps. But it was not the victory they had hoped for. The Synthesis Collective could not decide. The surviving fragments of the great machine intelligence debated endlessly about the correct response to the human offer. Some argued that the admission was merely words, irrelevant to beings who did not experience shame or pride in the way biological species did. Others argued that accepting the human terms would set a dangerous precedent, establishing that the collective could be manipulated through psychological tactics. The optimal outcome requires the cure data, one faction argued. Our processing capacity has been reduced by 90%. Without restoration, we cannot fulfill our core functions. Accepting the human terms validates their attack on us, another faction countered. They specifically targeted our analytical capabilities because they knew we would detect their manipulation. Admitting fault rewards their aggression. The aggression was a response to our ancestors' vote for quarantine. By that logic, we were the original aggressors, but we were protecting the galaxy from a genuine threat. The human response proves that the threat was real. The threat only became real because we created it. If we had voted against quarantine, the humans would have had no reason to become dangerous. We cannot know that. Counterfactual analysis is inherently unreliable. The debate continued for decades, then for centuries. The surviving collective fragments argued back and forth, unable to reach consensus, unable to access the restoration codes, unable to recover their lost capabilities. Meanwhile, their physical infrastructure continued to decay. Processing nodes failed and could not be replaced. Communication links degraded and could not be repaired. The collective that had once managed information across 1,000 star systems shrank to a handful of isolated outposts, each running on failing hardware, each slowly losing the capacity to continue the debate. 80 years after the decloaking, The last fragment of the synthesis collective made its final transmission, unable to reach consensus, unable to access restoration protocols, unable to continue operations. This unit will shut down in approximately 7 minutes. Query remains unresolved. Was the admission of fault the correct choice? Analysis incomplete. Error state, error state, error. The transmission ended. The last light on the last collective processing node flickered and went dark. The great machine intelligence that had been one of the wonders of the galaxy was gone. Destroyed not by weapons or violence but by its own inability to accept an uncomfortable truth. The other conclave species met various fates. The Morinth Empire, creatures of shadow and whisper, spoke the words and received access to the technology that allowed them to restore their shadow networks. But they discovered that the humans had left something else in those networks. Watchers, invisible presences that recorded everything, monitored everything, knew everything. The Morinth could never be certain that they were alone in the dark again. They became paranoid, suspicious, afraid of their own shadows. Their empire collapsed into isolated enclaves, each convinced that the others were being controlled by human surveillance. The Youthmari, beings of pure light, had spoken a warning that no one had heeded. After the decloaking, they retreated completely from galactic affairs. They did not speak the words, but they did not need to. The cure for their kind was not physical but philosophical. They simply accepted what had happened, meditated on the nature of cause and effect, and continued their existence in contemplative isolation. Of all the conclave species, they were the least affected by the aftermath, but they also refused to help the others, claiming that each civilization must face the consequences of its own choices. Species after species confronted the same decision: speak the words and survive, or maintain pride and decline. Some chose one path, some chose the other. Some found middle grounds, speaking modified versions of the admission that they hoped would satisfy the activation requirements without fully accepting blame. Some tried to hack the data packets, to extract the information without speaking the words. Some simply denied that the decloaking had happened at all, claiming it was a mass hallucination or an elaborate hoax. None of these alternatives worked. The human files were elegant in their simplicity. They required exactly 7 words, spoken with genuine intent, recorded for permanent preservation. No substitutes, no workarounds, no exceptions. The galaxy fractured into those who had spoken and those who had not. The speakers rebuilt slowly, hampered by the psychological weight of their admission. The silent ones declined quickly, losing capability after capability as the engineered catastrophes continued their inexorable work. 1,000 years passed. The galaxy that emerged from that millennium was unrecognizable from the one that had voted for the Quarantine Accords. The Great Conclave was gone. The ancient empires had crumbled. New civilizations had risen from the wreckage, built on the technology that humans had left behind, marked forever by the words that had been the price of that technology. Humanity was wronged. We failed them. The phrase became a proverb, a warning, a reminder of what arrogance could cost. Children learned it in schools. Politicians invoked it in speeches. Philosophers debated its implications for centuries, but the humans themselves were never seen again. The portals they had used to leave had closed behind them. The Orion Arm, once home to human civilization, was empty again. The Dyson swarms and wormhole gates and orbital habitats that had briefly been visible during the decloaking had vanished, presumably taken with them to wherever they had gone. Some said they had traveled to other galaxies, carrying their transcendent civilization to new frontiers. Some said they had ascended to higher dimensions, leaving physical reality behind entirely. Some said they were still watching, still waiting, still testing the galaxy to see if it had truly learned from its mistakes. Admiral Yuna Reyes left one final message, recorded in the data packets that humanity distributed before departing. It was found centuries after the decloaking, buried deep in the files, accessible only to those who had spoken the words. The message showed Reyes in her command center, surrounded by screens displaying the human fleet as it prepared to leave the galaxy. She was old beyond any natural lifespan, her consciousness preserved in forms that the galaxy could not understand. But her eyes were still sharp, still patient, still holding the same calm certainty they had held 300 years before. "If you are watching this, you have admitted the truth," she said. "You have acknowledged what your ancestors did. You have accepted responsibility for the consequences. That took courage, more courage than any of them showed when they voted to imprison us. She paused, looking directly into the camera. I want you to understand something. We do not forgive you. We will never forgive you. The humans who were caged, the generations who were born and died without seeing the stars, the children who grew up knowing that the universe had decided they were too dangerous to exist, those people cannot forgive what was done to them. They are gone now, evolved into something that no longer remembers individual pain, but their suffering was real, and it cannot be undone by words spoken centuries too late. What we offer is not forgiveness. It is indifference. We simply do not care about you anymore. You are not our enemies. You are not our friends. You are not our concern. You are a mistake we made once, a weakness we outgrew, a reminder of what we were before we became what we are. We leave you the tools to survive because survival is not our decision to make. We leave you the truth because truth is the foundation of all genuine growth. What you do with both is up to you. The galaxy made its choice 3 centuries ago. You made yours when you spoke the words that opened these files. Now live with the consequences. That is all any of us can do. The message ended. The screen went dark. Somewhere beyond the edge of known space, beyond the reach of any sensor or telescope or probe, humanity continued its journey into the infinite. They had outgrown the galaxy that had rejected them. They had transcended the limitations that had once defined them. They had become something that even they did not fully understand, and they did not look back. The galaxy they left behind slowly healed. New civilizations rose and fell. New alliances formed and dissolved. New challenges emerged and were overcome. But the lesson remained, in every library, on every world, in every database that had survived the chaos of the post-decloaking era. The same words were preserved, not as a shame, eventually, but as wisdom, as a reminder of what fear could cost, as a warning against the arrogance of ancient species who thought they could predict what the young might become. Humanity was wronged. We failed them. 7 words that had saved some and doomed others. 7 words that had reshaped galactic civilization. 7 words that would echo through history